Okay.
Okay. I'd like to welcome everybody here today for the Eureka Springs Park and Recreation Workshop. It's Tuesday, August 3rd, 2021. This is our workshop. It's an informal meeting where commissioners can bring topics for further discussion and possible action at a later date. I know that I've talked with Scott Miskell, our interim director, off and on, and he has a few items he has for us tonight. I think he's distributed that paperwork to you. Is there anything during the meeting that another commissioner would like to bring up for further discussion? It would be the opportune time to do that at any time. I'll start out now. Is there anything that any commissioner might have to bring to the table that we can talk about before we proceed into the agenda that Scott's provided? But if not, that doesn't close you from bringing it up later on either. Okay? So, Scott, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. Our main focus this evening, I'd like to take some time to discuss the planning process. We do have an old master plan that hasn't been updated in quite some time, and we have just a huge amount of work to do. Many of the projects that we have are ones that we can't accomplish this year or next year or the year after. We have a lot of things that will take years to accomplish, and so we need a comprehensive, well thought out master plan to help us to get there and make sure that everything we do is done the best that it can be, as inexpensively as it can be, and with the long-term preservation of the parks in mind. With that being said, in the near future, I'll be asking the Commission to discuss the master plan process, which would probably include formation of a committee or a focus group of sorts, just to try to get some ideas hammered out. I know about a year and a half or so ago there were some surveys that were done, and I'm sure we can still access that data, but just try to get some updated input from the public and get a well thought out master plan on paper. That being said, in a previous meeting, I think it was our last workshop, I was directed to meet with Craft & Tull, was a architectural and engineering firm that we had in mind for assisting with some of the site plans and whatnot. Excuse me. So I've provided you with a copy of what they gave me, and this is just for Lake Leatherwood. It involves master planning of the three major areas that we're looking to do development in. My thought is that we should focus on these three key areas and then focus on just restoration of the rest of the park, and try to limit, sort of like a zoning concept, limit the development to the areas that have already been developed, and then try to leave the others as pristine as possible. But the planning process, of course, will flesh that out. But the three areas that they would be providing site plans for and developing plans for would be the day use area up around the lake, where the bait shop and the cabins and all that are, then the sports field area, and then the shuttle drop-off area, which is the turnaround area where people come down on their bikes from the downhill trails, for instance, and it all converges into one area. There's hiking, biking, all sorts of things going on there, and it definitely needs planning out quite a bit better than it currently is. So that's all that needs to be said as to this. It's just the proposal.
Can I ask a question? Yes. So I know we should also have the watershed group doing some work in that same general area. Yes. How do you envision that will work? And
okay. Yes, fair question. In fact, that's why we have three people coming here this evening. There's three people that are going to speak briefly this evening about different components of what this master plan would include, and the consultants that we've already hired for the watershed planning will be part of that. So those are experts, and the ones that'll be speaking tonight are experts on their particular areas of influence, and all of their findings and recommendations would ultimately be included into a global master plan.
Okay, and would that be just for Lake Leatherwood, or would that be for all of the park? Park District,
Well, the proposal that I received already, that I've provided you with, is just for Leatherwood, but we envision one for Basin Park. Although it's a small park, there's a lot going on there and a lot of needs. And then Harmon Park. And Chris Fisher will be speaking tonight about some planning for the, shouldn't say more neglected, but they perhaps are more neglected, not as well cared for parks up on the East Mountain area. So, yeah, we'll have a lot of experts focusing on different areas that will ultimately combine into a single master plan.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to suggest that ultimately we should have a master plan for all the lands.
Absolutely.
Whether it's one document or we pull out Leatherwood and
Right.
maybe Black Bass and have those separate.
Right.
But the ultimate, I mean, I'm not saying it should happen right away, but the ultimate goal should have a master plan that covers everything.
Exactly, yes. And the only reason we've started with Leatherwood is we've already started doing some work out there, like the pavilion, and we desperately need to remodel the bathhouse, for instance, and the cabins have already been budgeted for some remodeling. And we look at things like some of the camping sites that we've put in place, previously. Are they really located in the best spots? A lot of them are right in floodways, and we just before we do anything major from here on out, we'd like it part of a really comprehensive plan. So that's why the first proposal I received was for Leatherwood, but that's not to the exclusion of the other areas.
Is this going to address the infrastructure at the marina, such as the sewer pipe issues and anything to do with the electrical or anything that we might need to plan to replace, or is this just a vision for the future and then we have to drill down to the electrical or any sewer issues that we may have?
When I met with the architects and engineers a few weeks ago, I did explain some of our infrastructure issues. We do have some major problems with septic. We do have electrical issues. All of those are going to have to be addressed. And that's why we need a comprehensive master plan now. So if we're going to plan on putting a building somewhere or even remodeling an existing building, we need to make sure we have septic capacity and power that'll handle all of that. Because as of right now, well, as a matter of fact, we've had 3 major backups to the septic system just in the last month that have cost us literally thousands of dollars just to remedy those. So we definitely will include all of that, and in the process prioritize the work that needs to be done so that we can either budget the appropriate funds or seek grants or combination of both, actually.
Yeah, so, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
I have another question, though. So I was wondering what kind of parameters you gave them, because obviously their job should be to implement what we as the parks want.
Yes.
But we haven't done any going out to the public. We haven't really done any of what our goals would be for those areas.
Yes.
I definitely understand the idea of getting some experts into how we implement them, but they shouldn't be coming up with those initial ideas.
Right. And keep in mind that I give you this just because I just received it. And obviously before we would even consider hiring anybody, we would probably have them come and discuss the process. But they do explain in here that the process includes the various meetings. One of the first things we need is site plans for the areas, so they would prepare those. But yes, we would have meetings with the public and other stakeholders, all as part of that. So it's by no means is it something where we would be just hiring somebody and saying, hey, do some planning for us. The planning is ours. The planning responsibility is ours. The the public has a great say in that, and will all be included in the process.
And we have had lots of, not enough, obviously, but we have had times over the years, public input.
Yeah.
So we do have some ideas of what the public has wanted in the past.
Right.
Just have to keep up, that's all.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a couple of documents that I have in my files that are labeled master plans, and they're maybe really, that's a stretch to maybe label them that, but there have been various times where people have come together and come up with some ideas, things they'd like to see, et cetera. So we'll certainly drag those out, but also communicate with the public and see what is important to everybody today.
Okay. And you said it was many years. Do we have a little time frame of how long we think this master plan would cover?
Well, I honestly believe that, I mean, obviously, as far as details go, the things that are nearest in time will be more detailed.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
I would like to see a minimum of 50 years as our looking, the period that we're looking for. At least 50 years. Look at the problems that we've got with the dam right now, with the bathhouse, with the pavilion that we just had to totally rebuild because it wasn't taken care of 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so I would love to see a minimum of 50 years as our focal, not our focal point, but our horizon. And that may seem a little bit over-optimistic, but I don't think so. I think we need to look that far ahead, at least for our general goals and objectives in any sort of plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense when you're talking things like infrastructure and having that, 40 years from now, we're going to need to
Yes.
do this work. I mean,
Yes.
and laying that out makes a lot of plan. But for other things, it may be not very realistic. A few decades ago, we suddenly have mountain bikes showed up.
Right, yes.
And if we have the next thing that shows up, it may make it very hard to do that.
Well,
But
yeah, and that's why I say that obviously something that's more imminent, we're going to have more details. But we should still have general goals and objectives that are up to 50 years out.
okay.
That's a good idea.
Okay, so that's where I hope we will be going over the next few months is appointing a committee to get the ball rolling on this, get site plans prepared so that we can at least have the visual documents that we need to plan more appropriately. And then have some of the experts and consultants that I mentioned start to do their various segments of this. And with that, unless anyone has any other questions, I'd like to talk quickly about the Glade restoration process and grants that are available. I met, probably a year and a half ago, I met a man named Stephen Dickey who helped on our committee, our Springs Gardens and Greenhouse Committee, and also then at that time he started mentioning the importance of glade restorations. I had no idea at the time what he was talking about or why we needed to restore the glades, but I've since come to realize how important it really is. Mr. Dickey, if you'd like to step up to the microphone, I'll introduce you here in a moment. But Stephen and I have spent some time, he's spent a lot of time, I've spent a little time with him, cutting some cedars out of the glades. It's the cedars that destroy the glades. Basically, the glades are flat areas of rock that are covered with a very thin layer of soil. And because of that, we don't get a lot of trees on it, and we have a lot of sun exposure that creates an entirely different habitat than a lot of the other areas in the parks. It allows certain plants to thrive that don't grow elsewhere, and certain animals as well, one of which is at a critical phase. And so I talked with Stephen about it, worked with him a little on it, and he's very passionate about it. I would say this is the type, or this is a project that that has been recommended as being critical to our habitat by a couple of doctorate level people that Stephen, I'm sure, will mention here in a moment. So it's not something that we're just doing because it's a whim. It's something that has been identified as critical to our park. So that being said, Stephen, I have provided the copies of the screens. He was going to do a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm told that the screen doesn't work real well here because we're so close to it. So as he references his slides for his presentation, that's what the document is that I've handed you here. Steve? I don't think his microphone is on. Or maybe step closer to it.
Yeah, we're having
There we go.
problems
That's better.
with that mic.
You want him to use one of these?
Yeah, can you just go up to the table
here and
and
use what
take
you
this in, Mike?
Oops.
Well, what I'd like to do is, again, my name is Steve Dickey, and I've been working with Scott. He's been kind to let me work in the park on one of the glades there. And I'd like to step through the PowerPoint slides that you have in front of you and just kind of informally talk to each one of those. And if you have questions, I'm not going to do any scripted things, so I won't be interrupted. If you have anything to say as we go along, please let me know if you have a question. So the first page is just a cover page. It says Glade Restorations with the Eureka Springs logo in the upper left. That particular picture is a panoramic of the glade, and you can see shading and insulation in that particular picture. It's a little off-cube or skewed because it is a panoramic, so it isn't true to life, but it gives you an idea of how much light is shaded in that particular section of the glade. So the purpose on the next slide, the purpose slide, the purpose of the glade restoration is to restore rare ecosystems, in this case a glade, and there are many dolomitic limestone glades in Arkansas and in Missouri. And there's an online resource. A lot of this I just gathered by doing research online. And there's a lot of stuff that is available from Missouri Department of Conservation. And there's been a lot of studies, of course, done by the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission on glades. So they're rare ecosystems, and they're quite important. Unfortunately, they're being overrun by eastern red cedar, which is a wonderful tree, but it is very prone to invade a glade ecosystem over time if you don't maintain the regimens of, say, burning and the occasional burnings which come from nature or from human burns when they go through and they burn out an area for agricultural or whatever reason. Those burns have been going on a very long time. Well, they're no longer done because we're so effective in our trying to protect our forests. So something we were trying to do that has been very effective, trying not to start forest fires, has adversely impacted the ability of glades to regenerate. So they depend on, to a great degree, from what I understand, is these periodic burns to come through and take out that understory area and the vegetation, and then recycle and give the plants and animals a chance to come back to that system and rebuild it. So the whole idea is to restore rare ecosystems, the glades, provide park visitor interaction and education. The particular glade we're working on right now really is designed to allow park visitors to walk through a glade. And the trail is pre-existing. And Scott and I were out walking through it one day, and we looked at it and said, that's a very nice glade in potential, but it's been invaded by red cedars. But the park trail goes right through that glade. So it's ideal in presenting an opportunity for park visitors to come through and get a very interactive visual of a glade that's been restored. Now, it won't necessarily be a pristine glade, that would be maybe further out and on the east side, but it is one that they can interact with and appreciate. The third bullet talks about developing research opportunities. My idea there, it was to say that, when we start building these glades out, we'll find probably, I hope, that academics from the university level and from the state level will become more interested in coming up and visiting. The Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission has already been here several times and has a very deep interest in the glades and some of the plants and animals that are on not an endangered list, but what's the term used for it, is a species of concern. Thank you. So they're very interested in those, and they've made a list for us to help us understand what those species are and that they are present in our park. So that would be to develop research opportunities, maybe. And then balance recreation with education. We have a great recreational aspect to the park. But there's also, I think, an educational element that can be expanded and used and provide a balanced approach to the park and kind of use that as well. You want people to recreate, but we also want them to understand the value of the environment that they're recreating in, why it's important. When they're riding those bike trails and enjoying those bike trails, that they understand the ecosystem that they're riding in. Now, that also can translate into their appreciation for other ecosystems throughout Arkansas that may not be recreational, but that may be basically used for, say, passing through for trail hikes, less impact maybe, and then they would then understand them better and then be able to maybe advocate on behalf of those ecosystems when the time comes in their community to talk to those subjects. The next slide is the proposal. Now, the proposal is basically 3 phases, and the years here are just kind of targets. They aren't necessarily hard and fast. But the 3 phases are, first, the walk-through glade, which is the one I'm talking about, we're working on right now, which is on the western side of the Lake Leatherwood, of the lake. And the second phase would be restoring a research glade, so to speak, and then possibly looking at maybe a digital learning center. So an opportunity for visitors to the park to come and look at some products that maybe our Arkansas Master Naturalists or Master Gardeners or other experts from academia or from the state have made available for them to learn about glade ecosystems and the other ecosystems throughout the park. Theo Witzel, who did a lot of the groundwork in understanding the park and the species in the park, addressed glades specifically, but he also addressed many other elements of the park, the lake itself and the other, the riparian zones and all these other areas of the park. He got into those and discussed them.
So can you just define what you mean by a research glade?
A research glade would be essentially the glades on the eastern side of the lake that are not as accessible, and they're not really part of the trail system, but they're up and on the southwest side in the hollows, on the southwest banks of the elevations out there. And those have been overrun as well, but they're probably more pristine and less traveled than the others. And those are the areas, to my understanding, that they were out there researching the collared lizard, and they were deciding that those are the areas where they might have potential for restoring that species to that area. So those, I would say, I'm calling them research glades because I think they provide an opportunity, if they can be cleared and sustained. They provide an opportunity for citizen scientists, for the public even, obviously for researchers from the state possibly to come down and look at those glades and watch them over the year. Really, to appreciate a glade anyway, you have to watch it throughout the year, because you go out and visit it one time and you really don't understand the glade. You have to go and watch it the entire year to see how it kind of changes through the seasons. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
If I could just interject, and then we do have to move fast along. We only have about 10 minutes, but what was the name of the doctor that we spoke with just a few weeks ago?
Yes, that was, sorry, not the tip of my tongue. He is back here. I wrote it.
While he's looking for the name, we spoke with a person who had come out and applied for some grants, or was going to apply for some grants as part of his PhD work. And among other things, they took DNA tests of some of the collared lizards that we have. and, for instance, found that because of the condition of our glades, the populations of the lizards are not able to move from one glade to another and are therefore becoming interbred. So there's the interbreeding process that goes on. So some of the research type things that we would envision doing out there is he actually has talked about introducing some other populations of the lizards to help. And so if that would happen, we would envision continuing to supervise or assess those populations. There's also a number of plants that are on that list of species of concern, and we would check for the reintroduction of those, how those populations are increasing, et cetera.
Casey Brewster.
Casey Brewster.
I should have remembered that. Yeah. But we've been talking to Casey via email. We talked to him on the phone, and he's willing to offer his expertise in the time that he has available to help us better understand the glades and to help us with some of the grant process as well. So he's been very helpful in that regard. So. Okay, bullet number 3 is expanding glade restoration based upon sustainability. That's basically taking it to the next phase if it's sustainable. So we never want to do anything that we can't sustain for the long term. So you'd want to restore glades, but not let them be restored and then later, 3-4 years down the road, fall back and to how they were before. So that's what the third bullet's about. Phase 1 is on the next slide. Phase 1 is the walkthrough glade. I have some bullets in there that talk about the key points, the volunteer effort, that it's only a quarter mile from the Beecham Trailhead. It's easily accessed by the public, and it provides possibly an immersive and educational environment for the public to visit it. And it's the next bullet talks about current status, which I won't get into, but it gives you some of the things that have been going on. The next slide is Phase 2, talking about the Research Glade and Digital Learning Center. On that slide, I mentioned Research Glade focus. The focus of that glade was just discussed, so we've already covered that pretty much. And then the Digital Learning Center, I discussed that a minute ago, talking about providing digital resources for the park visitors and for the folks who want to come and learn about glades. Phase 3 on the next slide is expanded glade restorations. That's that sustainable effort. If it's sustainable, look at expanding and opening up other glades. And that talks to what Scott was talking about. You have the interconnected ability to be able to connect the glades because the lizards, after the burns, from what I understand, are able then to connect to other glades, and you have that mingling of the lizards there, and that's good for their health and longevity there. The next 2 slides are basically graphics that show you the walk-through glade location and then the Beecham Trail and the Glade Trail. Now, the Glade Trail is not a named trail at the park. It's basically, I think, what was it called? Kind of a social trail in a way. It hasn't been named, and it basically starts in the point where you have those small bike cabins. What are those cabins called, I guess? The bike cabins?
Camping cabins.
Okay. The trail starts there and goes back and meets up with Beecham Trail further back, about a quarter mile. And while you're walking down that, you're walking basically through 2 glades, one that has been totally overrun by red cedars, and the one we're working on right now, which also has the invasive red cedars, but it's not as in bad shape as that first one. The next slide talks about Photolog and species identification. That's what we're doing right now. We're looking at the various species we encounter as we clear the glade, and we're taking note of those. These are only preliminary since I'm not a taxonomist. So I try to get a picture, go research it, and see what the species is, and then later on, hopefully, we'll be able to get more refined information there. Then the next slide talks about current efforts. That's close to the last of the brief, and it talks about basically what we're doing right now. We're continuing to build and submit grant applications. We're trying to work on some signage and see where we can find some good signage, interpretive signs for the glade, for the educational glade. And we're continuing the understory maintenance, and at this stage that's all mechanical. That means we go out and we pull them by hand, or we take down some of the small species that are there, the saplings, but that's all a mechanical process. We're continuing to photolog and build out the species list and connect the Glade. The next bullet there was talking about, there's a little, I don't know if it's from the limestone quarry pile, but there's a lot of limestone block that's just east of the Glade on the southeast corner. And we believe that might have been from the days when they were quarrying the limestone and they were building and using those as the materials for building. But that also might present another small ecosystem available if that can be connected to the Glade. We don't know what is down there and what kind of animals we might have present there. The last two bullets, one is engage the Northwest Arkansas Master Naturalists to see if they would be interested in visiting the Glade and as part of their volunteer effort and their time that they that they commit every year to use some of that time maybe for species identification. And engage the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission and the academic community, such as University of Arkansas Herbarium and the researchers, with restoration updates. And we're already engaged in a way when we're talking about Casey Brewster helping us out. So, and the last, the sides are reference slides if you'd like to go through those, but those kind of give you some additional information about the grant applications, what grants we're looking at in 2021, and what we're looking at in 2022. And on the very end is probably one of the very important pieces is the species of conservation concern, which was extracted out of Theo Witzel's 2018 preliminary terrestrial ecological assessment of the Miners Rock Unit of Lake Leatherwood Park. And there was a list he put together there, which is very useful, which we can use to measure what is in the glades and to determine, like one of them already we found is larkspur. It was already found along the Glade Trail and in the glade itself. So we know these species are out there. We know there's the seed bank. We don't know what's quite there yet. Once we clear the trees or the invasives, then maybe we'll see a little bit more what the seed bank will produce, which will be a lot of fun to watch and catalog and go from there. So that's where we are today.
Thank you, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So can I, actually, before you go, can I ask a question? Can you talk a little bit about your background and how you came to be so interested in glades?
I'm retired, and my background is in professional aviation. I did a little time in the government and law enforcement, things like that. But my undergraduate degree was in botanical science. So for me, it's kind of returning back to my undergraduate and getting back into botany, which I enjoy. And of course, Northwest Arkansas, you couldn't ask probably for a better place to explore that and to do something with your time that you think is valuable. And Scott had mentioned, when I got, my interest was piqued when we went out on a hike one day and we walked through what was Pinchin Mountain.
Yes.
And there's a glade in Pinchin Mountain. We kind of walked around, went through it, and I saw it, and I thought, man, that is a different place. And then we all went home. And then I came back the next day and I said, I needed to go back and look at it. And then I spent the whole year looking at that glade. And it was eye-opening to watch the various different species start to pop up through the year. It was like a little procession of different plant species. Not so much on the animal side. They're a little bit more secretive about their presence, but the plants can't help but show themselves. So that was a lot of fun. So my background basically is botanical science as an undergraduate. I'm kind of doing it now it just seems like a worthwhile thing to do.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the reason I wanted Stephen to just bring us up to date on what we're doing as far as the glade restorations is because there will be a time where we may be bringing some issues before the commission. We had come across a grant, for instance, that was available. We could have gotten $100,000 towards this project, but we just didn't have the time, so we'll probably apply for that next year. So I wanted you to know a little bit about what we're doing and why it's important. The next thing is Chris Fisher is going to update us on actually just a surprisingly quick project that's come along, the Spring Reservation Improvement Project. And the only thing I'll say as an introduction is I think that some of these smaller parks up on East Mountain have so much potential. Not that we want to develop them with a lot of hardscape or what have you, but we do need to give them a little more attention. And Chris Fisher approached me just a week or two ago about a idea that he had, and I understand that it's come a long ways in that quick time. So, Chris, if you'd let us know what's going on with this spring reservation improvement project.
A little quick background. I'm going to read you all a quick statement that I haven't sent to you yet. The project quickly arose due to contacting a person who had supported a project in the past, saying, I thought you were going to come and see me again and do some more stuff. I said, oh, well, give me a couple of days and I'll think about what we could do. And surprisingly, I knew a little bit about the Glade project. I had been involved with the Sandy Formica proposal to look at the creek meetings. I had sat in with the Craft and Tull exploratory site plan production meetings, and sensed that there was a need for creating planning data, creating planning awareness that I'm glad to hear that the Commission considers one of their primary scenarios, and that's to develop comprehensive master plans for each and all of the park assets and holdings that you all are responsible for their care and enhancement and protection as part of your mission. So I'll just read through this quickly because it illustrates a little bit more than the two documents that I sent along, which were the basic selling points to gain the project. So the Spring Reservation Improvement Project continues some of the goals of the recent AR Urban and Community Forestry Grant from 19 and 20, the Miners Rock Mitigation Project that I did at Lake Leatherwood City Park with the Waltons, funding, and the ongoing development, which is also funded by the Waltons, of the currently in progress Eureka Springs Linear Arboretum. So this new project is locally funded. It'll be administered by the Community Development Partnership and extends through July of next year. The project will directly assist the park's budget for assessing the need immediately for tree work to remove and trim existing trees within potentially hazardous areas at some of the reservation areas, which is already in progress. We had a really sound site visit through a bunch of these spaces last week to get in gear with how to approach engaging services either through park staff or for hiring professionals to get in there and start reducing these hazard issues. It's also a continuation of some of the work and efforts of the Springs Committee, which I served with for several years under the direction of Barbara Harmony. The committee disbanded well over a year ago or so, but left behind a legacy of bringing the Springs forward as their mission, with medallions that still can be seen at many of the storm drain inlets around town, featuring the image of the Williams crawfish, an endemic invertebrate species of the Ozarks, and still found at some of the springs. The springs have been tested quite a bit over time, and the results are simply discouraging. So we know that the water quality is poor, unhealthy, and potentially hazardous. The flow and discharge is also changing over time as our developments with our land use practices that are occurring within the karst landscape affects the recharge pattern of the aquifers. I'm inspired to present this project as a planning tool to help the community learn about why this network of spaces is so important. There have been a few extensive studies of the lands that we know as the spring reservations. The 1981 exfiltration study of Eureka Springs, Arkansas, an analysis of sewerage exfiltration, and a program of actions to restore the spring system is currently being organized into a searchable database along with the records of the Citizens Advisory Committee that conducted extensive surveys of residents to determine the presence of septic or sewer collection services for the entire footprint of the city limits. These two documents tell an extraordinary story of how the springs were affected and how they might be improved as essential natural resources. The mapping done in that study by Tom Alley and his team for that effort indicated a total of 38 springs and seeps within the main historic district area, and this is interpreting his map, and outlined then each of the recharge areas for all of those water bodies. Currently, though, the Parks chapter of the Municipal Code lists 18 spring reservations, including Water Street and Harmon Park, which are not exactly reservations, and that's something that I think we also have to clarify as we move forward in this project. Yet in the current mapping that you find in brochures or plans or various sources, only 13 of those locations from the municipal code list are actually evident as spring reservations. So one of the central goals of this project is to verify the geography and actual locations of the ordinanced assets. This is important for conducting a survey of the physical conditions of these properties to be able to affirm generally the boundaries that these public properties present. The other important goal of the project is to examine the environment of these places and to evaluate the ecology and the built environments of the sites. This involves an assessment of what the flora and fauna indicate, how the landforms and their soils appear through the slopes and elevation changes, and how the actual springs themselves are presented as small pocket parks. With this information in hand, the project will indicate a set of natural resource management concepts for parks to consider, how these properties might be improved and preserved, not unlike what Mr. Dickey is outlining for the Glades. The project also endeavors to shed light on the cultural and historical information about the role these locations have provided. This particular aspect is intended to engage the community as a form of outreach with potential programming and considerations by other municipal entities and nonprofits with a direct interest in the well-being of our namesake's heritage. Ultimately, this project hopes to renew attention for the value of these amazing resources and to stimulate well-considered restoration while provoking a refurbishment of their collective conditions as a set of vital green infrastructure assets. The unfortunate effects of climate change and the ongoing impacts of a visitor-based economy upon our green space scenarios here deserve a concerted effort to protect and enhance these functions on these lands within the city's forest and our extensive open spaces. This project seeks to create vital considerations for planning. I look forward to sharing this project with the community and hope that the Parks Commission will greatly benefit from the information that springs forth. I printed out a map that is a work in progress that really stems from the Eureka Springs Linear Arboretum scenario that several of you have listened to for a few years going back now, where the routes of using public access via streets, alleys, paths, and trails takes people out into the city's forest and will engage people within that inventory of contributing species and particular specimens of our 80 some odd species growing in town. And to do that, I started to create the routes along given corridors that we use continually, and there's a 3-mile loop that was to begin in Basin Park and go along Spring Street, around to Harmon Park, and then up to the upper historic loop, and then back down on Benton Street and back to the park. And then from there, I create spur routes that go off to East Mountain, down to as far away as Cold Spring and whatnot. It's difficult to create a connection to Magnetic Spring because we don't have a sidewalk or a trail that takes us directly there. So there's some kinks and some irregularities in these corridors and this network. But from the quick time that I've spent on the project starting 3 weeks ago, I've managed to jump into and scramble through most of these reservations and determine from this map where they might be. I need to go back in further to magnetic and some of the other spaces to delve a little tighter into the actual presentation of their conditions. But there are 3 that interestingly do not appear on the map. One is called Iron Spring, another one is called Oak Spring, and then a third, which is somewhat familiar, is Minnehaha Spring. And in looking at the current county clerk office records and boundaries of private properties in the area of where Minnehaha is alleged to be, there's no such indication of any public land within that confine of the private properties. And I know from looking at Alley's map in 1981, roughly within that ravine where that spring should be, and I'm not seeing the Minnehaha Reservation. So I'm bringing this up to your attention that in looking through the geography of these maps and the ordinances and whatnot, you discover that there are some anomalies, some unexplained mysteries, which is kind of fun. But also of concern that, well, if Minnehaha is in fact still a reservation, then what condition is it in? And what does it present in terms of recreational access? I'm understanding that there has been some private trail development that comes nearby that is intended to link into eventually some of the parks trail networks. But again, that's another realm of geography that I'm not quite familiar with. Anyway, I'm really glad to hear Stephen's presentation. I'm really super excited to hear the discussion of Crafton Tull and Sandy Formica's expertise coming to town. And I think that my response here in this presentation had to do with, well, what can I add through my efforts to the in-town version of things? And Harmon and Basin are pretty much out of my league because they're so intensively used and have so many more built environment scenarios. But within each of those 2 parks, there are 2 to 3 versions of springs. There's Dairy Spring, Cardinal Spring, and Basin, according to Alley's map, shows 2 different parts of the spring. One being the Healing Stone that's in the plaza, and then the cave-like entrance where the spring was actually tested by the USGS. So there's a little bit of learning for all of us to do about where are we describing the springs? Where do they emanate? How do they flow? How do they discharge? How do they enter into the creek systems? So there's some really sort of fun exploring to do here. And anyway, I'm just excited to be able to sit up here with you guys and talk about this. It's really quite a thrill.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting.
And so Chris, just to summarize, what the project is you're going to perform an assessment of sorts and inventory of the spring reservations, and make some recommendations as well as?
Recommendations, there'll be sort of schematic survey renderings that will show the sites, not measured meticulously. There's no point in going through all of that for each of these spaces. I'd like to indicate the presence of the dominant flora in the terms of the trees. I'll indicate distress that seems to be something that should be addressed. Invasive species is something that luckily so far have not seen a tremendous, oh my goodness, look what's growing in here just yet. The other thing that I would like to share and develop is what I'm going to call a compendium, which will just be a document where I can present the multiple layers of the story that the spring reservations represent, that cultural and historical heritage of how they came about, and imagery from the Springs Disc Archive. It's a historic archive that was created. There are several hundred images of the springs in this one disc. I believe the library and the Historical Museum have possession of this effort that was done by Glenna Booth and June Westfall and a group of people probably in 2009. So I'm going to assemble all sorts of information, put it together in a basic report, and then provide a real broad-based view of what's going on in each of the reservations. And I'm totally willing to consider other forms of input that can be considered for the project. Volunteers are also going to be welcome at some point. There's reference in the document to outreach with the school district. There are some students there that I believe will be able to create independent study projects. And given what's going to happen with the next year with the masking and the whatnot, I'm thinking that perhaps an outdoor education scenario will be more feasible than it's been in the past to get students into town and to take a look at not only the in-town resources, but also Leatherwood and the Glade, and they might be able to study and cover a group of subjects, not just botany or trees or springs, but the whole cultural story of what's going on here.
Thank you.
So there you go.
And lastly, I understand you've received outside funding for this.
I have local funding for this, and the agreement is that the work is to be produced as a deliverable, and that as the project moves along, the funding is possibly increasable, as well as the Linear Arboretum project through the Waltons. I have an open door to request more funding and continue that to a degree. So I'm in a nice position to start some things and keep going without an absolute deadline.
Great. And this will all be a big asset to this planning process that we're hoping to implement. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Lastly, I would like to just say that in the time that I've been here, I've come across some just amazing historical assets, especially out at Lake Leatherwood City Park, that a lot of people just don't even know exist. There's an old sawmill up there, a pretty formidable structure still. A couple of homesteads. We went out on a hike not long ago, and there's a cream separator that's still sitting out there after all these years at one of the homesteads. And so as I started to look into restoring the pavilion that is almost complete now at Lake Leatherwood City Park, I spoke with some people about historical preservation and the need for a historical preservation plan. And I wasn't sure how we were going to accomplish that. But just a few weeks ago, I met our new historical preservation officer and planner, Kylie Heberty, and I spoke with her about it. In fact, I've got to say, rarely am I impressed, so impressed very quickly with somebody and their knowledge. And I just was amazed. She provided me with a chapter that she wrote in another parks preservation plan, and I was just overwhelmed by the quality. And we now have her as a city employee. So I'd like to introduce Kylie Heberty, who is going to talk about what we hope will become the historical preservation, or she states on her sheet here, probably a more accurate term, the cultural resources management plan that I think is important to include in our master plan. Kylie, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So I don't have as much of a fleshed out project or proposal to present to you, but I really just wanted to open the conversation about a cultural resource management plan. Like Scott said, I've done this at a couple different levels in the past. So I've worked as a consultant for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the National Park Service, and local government entities in Colorado specifically to do cultural resource management planning at several different scales. So feel free to share that chapter with any of the commissioners, anybody that's interested. I'm happy to share that. But I also gave Scott a paper that just kind of is a really high-level overview of what a cultural resource management plan is, why it matters, and I wanted to talk to you all about how that might look for Lake Leatherwood specifically. So in general, these management plans can kind of look one of two ways: be a chapter in a larger master plan that would include obviously natural resource management, recreation, visitor experience, all of those kind of big, broad ideas that Parks is tasked with managing. Or it can also just exist as a standalone document, and I've done both of those paths. But really the goal with either road is you want an integrated resource management plan. So something that, yes, will focus on built environment, whether that's historic buildings, archaeological sites, artifacts and things that are left over, but that those resources, even if it's not necessarily the mission of Lake Leatherwood to preserve and interpret CCC history or homestead history, that resource is acknowledged and the impact of any project or development is evaluated to see how it might impact those resources and how we can mitigate any adverse effects. So that's kind of a super high level of what that would potentially look like. So obviously it would involve a lot of conversation with a focus group or whoever is tasked with thinking about the Lake Leatherwood master plan, or specifically just the cultural resource portion of that discussion. And then it would involve resurveying that area. So it is a National Historic District. That doesn't necessarily mean, and as you all know, that those resources are static. So the National Historic District was, I think, amended in 98, or it was somewhere in the 90s. So obviously those resources have changed. Some of them might not even exist anymore. Some of them have probably fallen into disrepair due to deferred maintenance and stuff like that. So reevaluating those, see what condition they're in, and then have discussions more broadly about proposed development, what potential effects that might have, and making really attainable and clear goals about what we want for those resources moving forward.
Thank you. I think it's very important that we include a historical or cultural resources preservation plan in our master plan. I didn't really see that in the last one that we did. And when I went out there and actually laid eyes on some of the resources that are still there, and unfortunately, the condition that they are degrading into, I thought it's very important that we do this. And I think that probably three major components is identifying what those resources are, and then a plan to preserve them, number one, and then secondly, how to make them available to the public, because a lot of them we may not want the public out there other than through tours or guided hikes or what have you, so to preserve them, but also allow people somehow to see them, experience them, et cetera. And those are two competing things, because the more people are out there seeing them, the more people are chipping pieces of the walls off for souvenirs and spray painting them and whatnot. So
Kaylee, when you said resurveying, did you mean resurveying what historical features were there that we may or may not know about? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think there are something like 12 contributing and non-contributing buildings, structures, and sites that were listed on that National Register nomination. So looking at each of those that were listed and, yeah, just has anything major changed?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Did they disappear? And getting a good picture of what they look like right now so we can make decisions for those moving forward.
When you say 12, are you talking about Lake Leatherwood, or are you talking about other properties?
I am specifically thinking about Lake Leatherwood, and Lake Leatherwood is the National Historic District, but this idea of cultural resource management being an integral part of this larger master plan process for other park units within the city, I think is something that, that needs to be part of that conversation, because just because a site isn't as developed as a Lake Leatherwood or built environment features don't jump right out to you, they're still there. And a lot of times they're not things that people would necessarily think are historic or super important.
Your office could coordinate with parks on some of those national historic, like you said, Lake Leatherwood has, 13, 15 spots that are on the, some of them are so obscure when you look it up. They're this little part of this bridge, CCC built it, so there's a piece left, and I don't know, I'm sure updating all that
Yeah.
would be from your office, but then we could also coordinate it in our plan.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of leans toward another conversation that Scott and I have had about the HDC and authority and how all of that kind of goes together with, there's more than one historic district in Eureka Springs, and that seems to kind of have maybe been forgotten or passed over inadvertently, and just making sure that, all interested stakeholders are having a seat at the table when decisions about historic resources are being made. But I'm happy to help however I can to facilitate this planning, and I'm really excited for what this could look like moving forward.
Good deal.
me too.
Thank you, Kylie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I thank you for hearing me on these issues. Some of these are ones that have been bubbling up for some time, and just wanted to make sure that the Commission had the opportunity to hear some of the directions we're going in this planning process. And there are more, but wanted to keep it to under an hour. So thank you very much. Are there any questions?
No, I've heard a lot of good information. It's kind of exciting to listen to what we've got good citizens working with what we've got planned for the parks, and everybody's getting involved, and that's a positive sign. I'm glad for that.
And that's all I have.
Nope.
Okay.
We adjourn.
Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Oh, Scott.
Yes.
And
When I went to Chris, was talking about having the GIS component. But I don't think the park is particularly up on GIS right now.
No, we don't have any.
It would